Hey guys, it's Cam here. Welcome back to the Build Room. In this week's episode, we are going top to bottom on Do For Now and doing all of the cleanup jobs and some big jobs actually to get this thing ready for registration. So stick around and check it out. Alright, so if you watched the last episode, you know we made the deadline to get to Toyotas in the Park, which was just awesome. But there's still a bunch of things that we need to get sorted before this thing's going to be ready for registration. So, we've got a full board here of all of the things that we need to do. The items in red are must-haves, the items in blue are could-haves, and the black items are should-haves. So going top to bottom, we have clutch master needs to be replaced. The front brakes and struts I'm going to replace with the ones from Violet Crumbles. We need to look at the pitman arm and the idler arm and the lower control arms just to make sure none of those ball joints or rod ends, etc. are damaged. We need to fix the exhaust gasket. Even though I did gasket maker the hell out of that thing, it still has a very small leak, so I'm actually going to put a second gasket in. We've got to connect up the heater core and the heater tap. It'd be nice to do the water pump and the pump housing at this point because with the heater core back in place, we no longer have that diversion. So basically, if we don't have the heater on, there'll be no free flow of water through the system. We've got to get a radiator shroud, the evap canister, the tennis racket with the air cleaner in it, the radiator overflow bottle, which is integrated to the washer bottle, but we've got to make sure the washer bottle pump works and that we actually have water squirting on the windscreen. We've got to do the radiator support. We need working headlights because I think we've got about 2 out of 4 at the moment. None of the indicators work, or maybe 1 or 2. I think the rears work, but the fronts are mostly blown. We need a spare tire and the associated jack and jack handles and all those sorts of things. It'd be nice to change the dash fascia and get all of the instruments working at the same time because I think there's a couple of things that don't work on that dash at the moment, including the alternator warning light and the oil pressure warning light. We really should put a console panel in to cover up where the radio normally goes so we don't have that nest of ugly wiring. We need to have a working rear demister and the button associated with it. We need pedal rubbers. We should take a look at the seatbelts. The seatbelts in this are good, but on older cars, the thing that they normally look for is sun damage. So if these are sun damaged, I've got a bunch of them. We're just going to pick the best of the bunch and get them on the car. The steering lock doesn't work. I'm hoping they don't pick up on that, but I really should change it if I have time. There's far too much steering free play. We have to change that or they'll pick that up. We need wiper blades. I'd like to change the rear view mirror. I'd like to give it a vacuum and clean. We should also do some rust repairs. I also think that this does need an alarm. I may not need that until I actually go to pay the registration and they don't check it. They just, you do it on your word. And the steering wheel on this thing also has some pretty large separation in it, which is common on these, but that won't pass inspection, so I'm going to have to replace that too. So that's a pretty big list. As per usual, it's just before midday on Sunday, and this thing's due to go over the pits on Tuesday at 7:30. Now, I have to work Monday, so we really just have what's left of today, and then some of Monday night to get this done. So we may be triaging that list pretty heavily, although I'm not really sure what we could get rid of and still pass. So yeah, the car is up in the air. It's still looking pretty good. There's a couple of little bits of surface rust. I have in the background been testing out some different finishes. So far, the winner for protecting this seems to be a satin clear coat that we put over an adhesion promoter. So as you guys know, I've got new graphics coming because these are gloss and I wanted matte. So when we change these over, we will go through and protect all of these panels so that I can run it like this for a little while. Now I've already got the car up in the air, so we're going to start on the suspension, then we'll move into the engine bay and get all that sorted, and once that's done, we'll do the exterior lighting and then tidy up the interior pieces. So yeah, we'll start with the struts and then go from there. But right now, it's time to go shopping. All right, take one of them. One of these just in case, and a set of these bad boys. Oh. Handy to have. And we'll pop some stuff back into stock. course they fell over. All right, so I've grabbed a bunch of different parts from the storage unit. There's a couple more boxes of these in the car, but we have the struts out, so let's get them in. All right, so because we're going to take the struts off, we are going to have to disconnect the brake lines and all that kind of thing for the front half of the car anyway. So just a little tip, you've got a full reservoir full of fluid. You don't want to have to deal with that, you know, dripping out of the lines in the entire time. Now you can cap off your lines if you happen to have a cap laying around so that the fluid doesn't leak out. I don't have one. So what I'm going to do is use my vacuum bleeder to actually just suck all the fluid out of the front brake reservoir and also the clutch master, because as I said, we're going to change the clutch master too, so might as well kill two birds with one stone. Now, while this hasn't been particularly successful in bleeding brakes, because all of the Celica stuff doesn't have an O-ring on the bleed nipple, so it kind of just sucks air through, it's pretty good for this. So you just dump it in and vacuum it out. All right, so with those emptied out, let's have a look at the brakes. All right, so why are we taking these brakes off? There is a number of reasons. So firstly, the discs were really corroded. They haven't really brushed back as much as I would like. They still drag because they're thicker because of the rust. So I don't know how much driving I'm gonna have to do to get these back to metal or whether they would actually get back to anything decent. So fairly reduced braking performance from the standard setup there. Secondly, they do feel a bit spongy, and the corrosion's probably got something to do with it, but also these are twin piston Sumitomos off a Corona. They're not standard for the RA28, and they should actually have a 15/16 master cylinder behind them. The RA28 only has a 13/16 master cylinder, so there's a fair bit more pedal travel and they do feel a bit spongy. Thirdly, the soft line here is starting to look like it is cracking, and it has a nick on the back in one area, so I don't think this one would pass. I think the other side's just as bad. And then finally, the hubs on these are thicker than the RA28 ones, so you actually push the wheels further out, which reduces the clearance of the edge of the tyre to the lip of the fenders. So we need to change that to stop them rubbing. There's also the fact that these are non-standard brakes, and anything in WA that is non-standard, even though this is an OEM setup from a later model car, it's not actually legal or roadworthy without an engineer approval for it. So I don't want to go to the trouble of getting these engineered. They're not that great brakes for the cost that would be associated with that. So yeah, we're just going to throw the ones from Violet Crumbles on, and it's pretty easy to do. So all we've got to do is disconnect the soft line up there. There are 2 bolts on the bottom of the strut. There are then 3 bolts at the top of the strut tower. And basically all we need to do then is lever the lower control arm down. It basically springs upwards with all the other suspension components like the sway bar and the tension rods. So yeah, it's gonna wanna spring up. So we just lever it down with one leg on a pole, and then the struts should come out and we can just drop the new ones in. All right, so I can take all of those off and it won't drop, but I'm just gonna put one on to stop it falling all the way out of the car. You'll see why. Now we get our lever. Okay, and if we lever this down, hopefully we can pull the strut out. All right, we're partially off. We need to be able to lever forward. This needs to be shorter. Take 2. All right, so you can see now we're off that bottom ball joint. This is just hanging free and it's not falling out because we've got that bolt there. Now we just hang on to the strut, pull that last bolt, and we're away. Now the good news here is that ignore the brake fluid, but the ball joint at the bottom here on the lower control arm looks like it's all intact. So just gonna clean the brake fluid and stuff off here and then we'll get the new strut in. All right, so get the new strut in. Just got the one nut on again. All right, snug as a bug. And as you can see, having the weight of the suspension on it has already raised it up. So we no longer need nuts to hold it on. So now we just bolt everything up. And those bolts get torqued to 108 Newton meters. Now we can put our brake line back in. Nice. Always hand tighten these as much as possible. You don't want to cross thread them. And then these nuts just need to be tight, but they're 31, 32 Newton meters. Just check them out. All good. So that side's pretty much done. We obviously need to bleed that, but we can't do it until we do the rest of it. So for this side, all we really need to do is go, and we're done. So yeah, everything's in, nice and clean, nice and tight. The ball joint on the lower control arm was fine again. Everything's torqued up, ready to go. So now we're gonna start in the bay, and I'm gonna start with the thing that I hate the most, because then everything should be downhill from there, and that is the clutch master. Now, this is a new Protex clutch master, and I also had a new Protex slave cylinder, and this thing bleeds up okay and then loses pressure over sort of a day or two to the point where it's really not a nice experience on the clutch. I put in a second slave cylinder the other day and it didn't make any difference. So now it's time to change the master again and see if maybe that was the problem. If that isn't the issue, then we obviously have either a leak in one of the lines or something like that. Now, none of them have got any moisture around them, so it doesn't seem like they're leaking, but this is a very slow leak, so you know, it's hard to tell. This doesn't bother me too much because, to be honest, I hate these master cylinders. That weird cone-shaped thing is a surefire sign that it's not OEM. And on the new one, I managed to find a brand that has the more standard looking reservoir. This is an ACS clutch master, and that is the number if you're looking to get one. So all we have to do here is undo that hard line, and then there is a bolt on the underside, which you can see would go through there. And then there is a stud on the top, which you have to get to from inside the cabin. And that's what sucks, everyone. So I'm gonna start with the bolt that's inside the cabin, and then we'll get the easy ones. All right, so that light is pointing to where the bolt is that we need to get to, right up behind the dash. Lovely placement. So the first thing we do is take this piece out, just so we can see it a little bit easier. There's just a single Phillips head up here, and then one down the end there. You can see between the wires. All right, now with that out of the way, if we just follow the clutch pedal up, we will find right at the top there, you can see the gold adjustment rod. That's in the back of the slave, and the bolt that we need to undo is that one above it. Whee! We'll just have to take out that split pin, and that'll let us remove the dowel that goes through the connecting rod. And that is obviously all very tight in there. I would recommend that you firstly jack up the car, get it off the ground so it's at a reasonable height, because if you're laying on the ground, this is hard. You can take the seat out, you don't have to, but it does give you a little bit more space to move. And then the rest of it is extension bars and long nose pliers. All right, that footwell is a tight hole, so the smaller the equipment you've got, the better. So I'm going to use a 1/4 inch 12mm deep socket, and then I'm going to use an adapter to take that from a 1/4 inch to 3/8. That way I can then put a 3/8 knuckle on it, a 3/8 extension bar, another 3/8 knuckle, and then an even longer 3/8 extension bar. And what that's going to let me do is to snake all the way up behind the clutch pedal, get onto that stud, and that stud on the Protex one is too deep as well. Protex, you suck. You should have made that stud a lot shorter. And then once you're properly located on the stud, this will get around the clutch pedal, and this will get you out to a point where you can actually take the thing off without having to lay upside down in the cabin. So let's try it out. All right, apologies, you're going to see a lot of the top of my head here. All right, so the socket is on the nut now. We can get it around the clutch, and I've got the back end there, which I can quite easily attach a socket wrench to. And then, by the grace of God, all right, it's turning. It's a bit funky because there's two knuckles in it, but we're on there. All right, now that I've got it loose, I'm going to drop the middle knuckle and just use the 2 extension bars together. Now you could also use the impact driver just to loosen this off, but I'd prefer to be careful with it. Oh, and it's taken the whole stud out. Again, way to go, Protex. It actually bottomed out, so that's really interesting. We'll have a look at that in a second. All right, so with the stud out, the only things holding it in now are the hydraulic line and this nut down the bottom here. So we're gonna take off the line first so that this isn't moving around when we're trying to undo it, and then we'll take out that bolt. Using a flared line tool again, crack that, get a rag under it, it's still gonna spill some. All right, so the line's free. All right. All right, so looking at the Protex one, there's a couple of things. First of all, if you have a look at that distance there between the back of the master cylinder and the end of the bolt, that is actually bottomed out on the strut. So, you know, that would have been moving around a lot. I would say it wasn't as tight as it should have been. It's really hard to see up there, so I just didn't notice it when I put it in. So that's a fail for first up. There's really only a couple of bits of metal in there. There is a sizable metal plate on the inside, but I don't think it's going to take up that much. I would say this is well and truly bottomed out. And if you look at the ACS one, you really can do that up all the way to probably maybe 2 millimeters before the body. So that one should become nice and tight. In terms of the seal, I can't actually see any fluid here. It looks moist, but that could have just been off my fingers. So if I just pull this out, we're not keeping this. And it actually looks pretty dry in there. So for starters, there's a retaining pin. You can see the push rod just moves around in there so it can move up and down with the pedal. But yeah, to be honest, that's not exactly a smoking gun. This is horrible. This is also horrible. So, you know, I wouldn't recommend the Protex ones, but in terms of whether it's leaking or not, there's no smoking gun here. Installation is just the reverse order of the removals. The one thing you do want to check though is the length of the push rod. So the push rod distance to this clamping mechanism here, it is adjustable. You just spin this around, it'll move in and out on the rod, and then there's a locking nut behind it, and you can see, I don't know if you guys can see, but you can see on the rod there, it's kind of got two flat sections. That's so you can get a spanner onto it. And basically you turn the rod once it's in the car, because this would obviously be fixed on the clutch pedal, but you can just twist the rod in order to move it in and out if you have to make an adjustment, and then lock it back up with a locking nut. But that's real hard to do when it's in the car. So if you can get it right before you put it in, that's the better option. So yeah, set it based on the old one, and then hopefully you don't have to adjust it. And if you do, well, welcome to hell. All right, so shiny new clutch master. And look, even if it wasn't the problem, I much prefer the look of that one so it matches these. And these ones, Yes, they're yellowed with age, but I will be replacing this master cylinder. This one here, this is a 15/16, so nice new white clean reservoirs, bigger center bore, so it'll push those twin piston calipers fine. And one of the tricky things is, if you look at it in comparison to this one, the front line is in the same place on this one, and then this line, which normally points over to the side, ends up pointing up on this. So it's not perfect, but a lot of the ones that I've seen, both lines come out the other side of it. So you end up having to move your brake lines a fair bit, and it's hard to make it look factory. So yeah, once those are fully refurbished, we will get this on and it will match that nicely. I'm calling that done, and that means we can mark it off on the board. Now, the pitman arm and the idler arm and the lower control arms, I'm not going to do those. I checked out the ball joint on the lower control arms and they were fine, and I checked out the pitman and idler before and they were fine as well. So we shouldn't have changed the alignment too much with this. Could have moved a little bit, hopefully not enough to bother getting it redone before we go over the pits. So now we're going to move on to the exhaust gasket and the heater cores. All right, so at the back of the engine bay, we have the two heater core pipes. Those connect into these two pipes here, but as an intermediary, you also have the heater tap, okay? Heater tap sits on the firewall here. This little guy basically routes back to the heater controls in the dash, and these heater taps are basically like unicorn poo nowadays. So you can't really get them. What people do is they get RA28 ones and they transfer the mounting bracket onto the new heater tap. This one's in not too bad shape, to be honest. You can see there's a little pinhole just in here, and that's pretty high up, but I think what we can do is just get the hose past it and put the clamp up here, which should be okay. So yeah, basically that stops the water from going through. When these things fail, one of two things happens. Either they always sit open, and they just continually have the heater running in the cabin, which isn't great, or they won't open at all, in which case you've got no heater. Now the hoses, as we route them through, one connects into here, and there is another point, I think it's this one here, which, oh great, has a bolt snapped off in it. So I might try and get that out, then again I might not. But one clamp will probably do the job for now. We can always add the second one in later. Now, the other complication here is that when we did the water pump on this one, and I cut this stump down, if you will, you need to have water flowing through here. Now normally what they have is this little bypass. So that bypass there connects a hose into a bypass that's on this pipe, but this thing was rusted so far back that we had to cut the bypass off. Now that's fine at the moment because we have a giant bypass and not only bypass, but here, once you put the heater tap back in, we won't have that bypass functionality when the heater tap is turned off. So I may pilfer the housing off one of the other engines and throw it up on here. The 18RG and 18RC ones are different, so I'll probably be stealing the ones off Violet Crumbles, but Violet Crumbles put enough parts into this already, one more's not gonna hurt. But if we can for the pits, I might just run it as it is and just leave the heater on. That's probably the easiest solution to all this. And then the exhaust gasket, so you can see down here there's some orange sealant. I put a new gasket in, I put orange sealer on it. It is 99% of the way there, but there is just a small leak. So what I'm gonna do is just pull that out, and rather than try and do it up again, and this will be a geometry thing probably from here to here, I'll just make sure the surfaces are clean, but then what I'll do is I'll actually just put two gaskets in it and some more sealer, and then zip it up as much as I can. And with the extra thickness of a gasket, we should be okay. Why bother going to a big hassle of trying to get that thing to mount up properly when the aim of the game here is just to get it licensed? So that might be a problem. It looks like we've got a dodgy exhaust stud, so we potentially need to replace that one. Actually, rather than replace it, I'm just gonna throw a couple of washers on it. That should take up the room and we'll throw it back in because we just need to get this done, right? All right, I think that's actually got it. I mean, you have to check that pretty quickly before the exhaust gets hot, but yeah, I couldn't feel anything around here. So, I mean, you can hear the valve train and you can hear air being sucked in and the ticking of the valves through the carbs. But once you've got the tennis racket on, that will silence down. And I think we're okay for leaks. So I'm just gonna leave it like that. Even if there was a little leak there, I don't think they'd pick it up. All right, so we'll start with the routing of the lower hose. Just as you know, you start with the one at the back here, so this one's not in the way. Now, you've got to be careful with these heater hose pieces here because they curve in and then they're brazed onto the heater core. So if you try and get a hose in there and you wiggle it around or you pull it or whatever, the likelihood of you cracking one of those joins is fairly high. So I'm just going to put some WD-40 on the outlets, just so that hopefully the hose slips over a little bit easier. This will be a tight hose, and we normally like tight hose, but in this instance, not so much. All right, minimum of fuss there. Okay. All right, so we've got the hose that we're gonna fill it from here, and then this one, I'm just gonna poke down through the engine bay and under the car, and we're gonna just empty it into a bucket. All right, so we've got our funnel in the fill hose, we've got a bucket of water, and we're just gonna slowly tip this in, and hopefully it'll come out through the bottom. But I'd say it'll take a bit to fill up the core. I can hear good things, and we got clean water running out into the bucket. So, let's take a look at that. All right, so what you can see in there is a bunch of radiator dirt, which is not surprising, but actually I'm pretty happy with that. It doesn't look too bad to me when you consider what came out of the radiator previously. This is actually pretty good. So I'm really hoping the reason this was all disconnected is because they were gonna fit the 1G in here and they just didn't know if they had room, so they took it all out and obviously never got around to putting it back in. So I'm just gonna hook it up, we're just gonna send it and see how we go. Now I'm gonna twist these and not yank them. It's more delicate, like a gentleman. Okay. Now, this is obviously attached to the console. You have a pin. All right, we'll get this hose out of the way so you can see a bit better. But you've got an arm that the post on this arm slips through that hoop on the end of the cable. And this mechanism here actually clamps the cable in place. So I'd recommend you do this before you try and bolt the thing together. And you just pop the clip off the bottom. So now it'll flip up and down. Then you can place the cable over and then lock it in place. And there's usually a set of marks on the cable that you'll be able to see where it was clamped previously. Just try and line it up to that. There we go. And that's how the finished product should look. Nice and snug. Okay, now we get a couple of bolts in this. Now we can fit our second cable. Be real careful on this one. All right, so this is our routing, heater tap here. The out pipe for the heater tap goes into the core closest to me, and then the furthest away has the long line going all the way down to the water pump section, whereas the heater tap input comes directly from the head, just like that. All right, so it's all in. Hose clamps are done up tight, but it's all in and the heater tap's working. I'll show you. Watch the arm there. That should be closed and that should be open. Closed, open, closed, open. So yeah, all seems to be working well. So now that we've dumped half of that water onto the floor, now would be a good time to take off the top radiator hose. I might throw a thermostat in and I'll get the radiator shroud on, because getting the radiator shroud past the hose and the fan together is difficult. Without the hose and the fan, it's only mildly difficult. Ew, it's a bit murky. Yep, no thermostat. And we're gonna take the old gasket off. It's hard to see here because it's green, but it is there, I think. Yeah, there it is. There we go. New thermostat, TT240-192 by Trident. Oh yeah, and the other thing about the thermostats is they have this little bypass valve here. If you can see that, that is that little brass thing rattling around in there. That's to actually let a small amount of water / air pass so that you don't get airlocks and you don't get a pressure build up in the system. So, put the new thermostat into our freshly cleaned hole. New gasket with it. This one is a TTG4, again, Trident. Sound is a pound. Where you going? Nowhere. Well, this sucks. I thought I had my radiator shroud here. I actually have a spare radiator here. I was going to swap the newer radiator into this bad boy, and I don't have a shroud. And I have 2 shrouds at the storage unit, but it's past 8 o'clock now, and we're locked out. So I'm either going back at 5 AM before I go over the pits, or we're going for inspection without a shroud. We'll have to see how we go. All right, so the hose is back in. We can fill everything up now. I'm just gonna open this so that I remember to actually put water in. And before I start it and run it, I just wanna quickly change the pump, because remember I was saying I didn't know what the fuel starvation issue was. So I would prefer just to swap the pump and see how we go. We have one on the old Violet Crumbles motor. This one was run for a really long time without fuel running through it. If you remember, I was running this thing quite a bit off the jerry can fuel system. And obviously the entire time I was running it off that, this was running sans fuel. So that can wear them out. It could just be a low pressure issue. So we'll swap that out, fill that up, and then we'll get this started. Okay. Hold pump out. Two. All right, now I'm going to start it up and run this for like 5 minutes or so just to burp out whatever is in the system. I'd like to do it for longer, but it's late at night and I don't want to piss everyone off. So we should do what we have to do. All right, so the radiator shroud's a bust. So we are going to do the evap canister, the tennis rackets, the radiator overflow, and the washer bottle with that. We'll do the radiator support, and we'll also do the steering free play. And that should finish us up in the engine bay for now. Oh yeah, and we can cross off fuel pump. Another win. And in between clips, I have bled the hydraulic system. Yeah, and the brakes bled up really easy. I mean, obviously there was already fluid in the piston area of the reservoir, so it was just a case of topping it off and pumping a bucket load of fluid through. It seems to have no air in it and good pedal feel at the moment. The clutch was a lot more difficult, so that really, I should have bench bled that one. So what I did was I actually cut a line off one of the other cars and I set that up and kind of just bench bled it in the bay. So yeah, I'll be hanging on to that for next time. Anyway, let's get into the rest of it. Go to Milwaukee. It's a boy. All right, windscreen washers go squirty squirty. All right, radiator support's in, but we have a problem. Yeah, that's a bit of a leak down there. And that is coming from the washer bottle. coming back out. I mean, this is not good. Don't do this. Oh, beautiful. All right, I'll put this in first. Oh yeah. All right, so the engine bay is looking pretty stock. We need the shroud, we need the hose that connects the overflow tank to the radiator, but that's about it. I think this is pretty good like this. So I'm gonna leave this now. I've got to wait until tomorrow morning to get the shroud and everything, so I'm gonna have to deal with that in the morning. But for now, I'm just gonna try and get the indicators and headlights working. And then tomorrow morning, we'll sort out the things in the interior that we need to do. But for now, evap canister, tennis racket, radiator overflow, washer bottle. Yeah. Well, look, it's not a great list, but I'm going to go to sleep now and I'm going to get up real early and crack on with this. All right, and we're back, and I hope I don't look too tired, and the reason for that might be it's a few days later. So after I shut the camera off, I did some work to the indicators and got them working, and I swapped out the headlights, and I had to put new plugs on the back of the headlights and all these different things, and it dragged it out to about 2 AM when I was finally finishing up. And then I still had good intentions of getting up at like 4:30, 5 o'clock and swapping the parts out, but I slept through both alarms. There's no excuse. Yeah, just overtired, and that's life. So I actually missed the inspection. I had to call up and schedule in a new appointment. That couldn't happen until the following Monday. So I had a bunch of stuff to do around the house. I've just focused on that for the last few days, and now it's Friday. And I figured with the amount of work that we did beforehand, we've actually got a pretty decent amount for an episode here, and I was actually worried about it getting too big anyway, so I think this is going to work well. What I'm going to do is, this is the stage we're at the moment. Not much has changed from what I showed you just before we stopped the clip, except for the fact that I've taken this for a drive. I was really quite concerned about whether or not the brakes, because you know, I'd put them together and thrown them on a shelf and really not touched them for a year, and really never tested a build to that level. So I wanted to make sure the brakes worked. I wanted to make sure the rest of the stuff that I'd done didn't cause any problems, make sure we didn't have a heater core leak and things like that. And the good news is, this went amazingly on that test drive. The brakes are amazing. Obviously the ones that we built for Violet Crumbles, they were standard size discs, but they were slotted. And obviously that impacts glazing over pads and things like that. But I think just rebuilding the calipers and having it freshly bled really did work wonders. The clutch feels amazing when I'm driving it, so gone are the problems that I was having before. That's all excellent. And all of the indicators and headlights now work. So I'm really sorry that I can't show you this going over the pits in this episode, but what we are going to do instead is the last of the things in the engine bay. And then in next week's episode, we will look at doing the interior. I've got to get an alarm in. There are some rust repairs that need to be done around the car, which I think would be better to do before it goes over the pits. And then hopefully it passes the pits and we're good to go. And then there are some other aspects to the aircraft theme that I want to build out, but they're not exactly street legal. So I'm gonna have to do them after this thing's registered. So yeah, for now, what we're gonna do is change the water pump housing so that we can set up that diverter pipe properly. We'll get the radiator shroud on. We'll give this thing some time to run so that we can bleed all the air out of the system and get that tied up. The Sikaflex that I put in the windscreen wiper reservoir should have cured by now, so we'll fill that up with water and hopefully it will hold. And then, to be honest, I think that's gonna get us to the end of the day. So yeah, let's get started. Oh, for sake. All right, so jumping forward, that was nearly a rage quit moment. We've got the fan and the pulley off the pump housing now. Basically what happened was the fan was stuck to the water pump, and no matter how much I tried, I could not lever it off. It shouldn't be that tight of a fit. I think what happened here is, if you look at the corrosion on the end of the pump housing, and this is also a little bit corroded. I think basically the pin in the center, so this piece here, I think that was getting wedged on the inside of the receiver. Now it's supposed to be a pretty tight fit because obviously it centers the fan. You don't want the fan off center, but it shouldn't be that tight. So yeah, I think what happened last time is I probably put this on part way and then just did up the bolts and sucked it on, ineffectively pressing it onto the end of it, and that took a lot of effort. So I had to take out the radiator, I had to take out the grill and things like that so I could close the bonnet and reach in with two hands on either side. And you know, this has probably taken about an hour just to get this one piece off. So yeah, bit of a sucky day. But anyway, it's off now, so we can move forward. I have a new pump and a new pump housing. Just let me make some space here and we can go through those. All right, so firstly, the new water pump. Now these are interchangeable between 18RGs and 18RCs. This is a ProCool Elite water pump. I'm pretty sure this is actually a Protex brand, which based on my experience with the master cylinders, I'm a little bit unhappy about, but I'm sure these are gonna be fine. I'm just a bit salty. So yeah, that comes as a single unit, and it comes with a gasket, and also, if you can see in there, it's also got studs to go into here, which we'll have to put in. And then we have the housing. Now the housings are a little different between the 18RC and the 18RG if you're looking at this for a G. So the aluminium part of the housing here is the same on both, which is the good news. The difference is the outlet pipe and the diverter or the bypass fitting. Now, I don't think you can get 18RG water pump housings particularly readily, but what you can do is you can buy an 18RC one, and then you can remove the pipe off your old one and put it into this, or you can have someone remake this pipe here, because that's a pretty trivial thing to make. Someone who repairs, say, heater cores or radiators can probably do something like this for you. And then you can just insert it into a brand new housing and you're good to go. Again, it comes with a gasket for it. Now the part number on the pump is PWP836PO. And the part number on the housing is PWP836HOG. Okay, so you've got what you need if you want to order these. All right, so let's get these in the car now. It's going to be pretty limited visibility because obviously with my hands down the front of the engine or working through the front, it's going to be quite difficult to get good shots, but I'll do the best I can. Oh, and considering I've had to pull this down to this state, I might as well do another flush on the engine. So what I'm going to do is, funnily enough, pull the housing off and take the thermostat out again, put it together with some hoses, and we'll run some high pressure water through it. All right, so here's a bit of stupid for you. That on the bottom, see how that's white? That's because there is an adhesive behind here and a peel off layer, which I didn't see. I just thought this was a paper gasket. So yeah, there's something to watch for if you're doing yours. So yeah, that is the backing plastic, and that is the thermostat under there, and it obviously is supposed to stick to this, which makes it a Unsurprising that this was actually quite difficult to get the bolts to center through when I was trying to bolt it all together, but I'm going to leave it on for now just while I put it on here temporarily, and then we'll do it properly for when we put this thing together for the final run. Now last time when I back flushed the engine, I just did it with the garden hose, which is the way I've always done it, but a couple of you made recommendations in the comment section of that one that I look at one of these, and that is basically a water gun that also connects to the air compressor to really pressurize the water and blast it through the system. So I got one, and we're gonna try it now and see how it goes. All right, so we've attached the top hose. The bucket is under the bottom hose. I'm gonna go top down first, and that is because the majority of the junk should be in the top of the head or at the bottom of the engine at the moment, obviously because of gravity. So I'll push that out first and clean it out, and then we will go the other way. So all we do is put the nozzle into the hose, probably hold that tight around there, turn the water on, and then as I give it a blast, so you can hear that water going into the bucket, and I'll just give it a blast. Oh wow. All right, so that really does pressurize the system. It's gonna wet everything in the garage, but that's life, I guess. Let's give it a good clean out. All right, so that's our water from the first run. It looks very, very murky, very rusty. Not exactly what you'd want coming out of your engine generally, but hopefully we clean it out once. It's all good. There's not too much debris in there. I would imagine a lot of the big debris, like the muddy bits, has come out in the previous dropping of the water. That's not too bad, all things considered, right? So now I'm gonna empty this out. We'll reverse flush the engine and see what that looks like. All right, now I've got this contraption set up. We've moved the hose and I've clamped this on. So I'm gonna square it from the bottom. We'll see the water come out here, and hopefully you guys will see the difference between when it's just running normally and when it's got the air pressure behind it. All right, that's normal. Give it a squirt. All right, yeah, that was super messy. All of my bare metal is wet, but we'll tidy up, pull this off and see what it looks like. All right, so I tipped this out and you can see just what was left in the bottom. That's the stuff we're trying to get rid of, all right? All of this stuff that basically goes through and it will clog passages in the radiator. It will clog areas of the engine. So yeah, you don't want that in there. So the more we can blast out, the better. You've just got to make sure you keep doing it. Don't blast it open like this and then go, oh, one's enough. The reason being is if you loosen all this stuff and then you put it back together and let it run through, anything that was going to clog up the engine is going to clog up the engine because you just loosened it and did its job for it. So yeah, I'm going to do this a couple more times, and then we will hopefully have clear flowing water and we can throw it back together. All right, looking pretty clean in there as well, which is a good sign. And the pump housing sits like that, and it's got 3 bolts. 1, 2, 3, holding it in. And if we twist it right, we should be able to get it out without moving the alternator. All right. Now looking in through the front, you can see how that mounts up. So we need to clean that whole area, get rid of all that corrosion and stuff like that, get rid of the old gasket, and then we can get the new gasket on and the new pump housing in. All right, you can see we've cleaned the surface of the block down, so the gasket's got a nice smooth surface to sit on. Now you'll notice around the outlet there, that's actually areas where the corrosion's gone past the gasket and started to eat away at the metal of the block. So what we're gonna do there is just make sure that we put some Hylimer sealant on the gasket before we put on, which should fill in those gaps and it'll be fine. The other thing is the Hylimer also is a cheap insurance policy, because the last thing you want is to put all this back together and then have it leak from that gasket area. So I'm just gonna clean down the rest of this area now while I've got everything out of the way and I can get good access, and then we'll throw it back together. Putting gasket maker on both sides. Obviously this side is the one that's facing the block, so it's the one that's got to deal with that corrosion. So I'll probably build it up a little bit thicker just around the port, and I'm putting it over the whole thing. Not that there's any water seal down here, but I find you just want to be consistent with the thickness, and then it also just helps everything to sit in place while you get it bolted up. Now I'm putting some new hardware in it. I've got some zinc bolts. I've just put these in and out of the block a few times to clean the threads on the block itself. And these are going in there. There are 2 short and 1 long. It's easy to tell which is which because you've got 2 high bolt points which take the long bolts, and then a low one which takes a short one. They all go into the block about the same depth. All right, and if I twist this just right going in, should be able to get that hose all the way across. Okay. All right, sorry my arms are in the way, but now you can see I've got 2 bolts in. Here's the last one. All right, so that one's in, and you can see the pipe poking out where it should be. This line here is going to circle around into that. So now with the housing firmly in place, we can get the pump on it. Because it is a new pump and a new housing, we don't need to use any sealant or anything like that. Just the paper gasket will be fine. And then a couple of things on the pump. I've already put the studs in just to make things easier. And when we install the pump, the weep hole here has to be facing down. All right, or as close to down as we can get in this situation, but just like that. All right, it's all looking good there. All right, so it's all looking good. Before we put the fan and everything on, I'm gonna get the hoses on just because they're easy to reach at the moment, this one particularly. And we got new radiator hoses. So the bottom is a Gates 050219 and the top is a 050218. I'll pull these stickers off. Even splurged on a new hose clamp. Then we can put the belt pulley on. And then before we put the fan on, I'm gonna put the belt on, and I've got a new belt as well. That is OptiBelt 11A850, I think is the number, but yeah. Those ones are pretty easy to find. You can pick them up at most auto parts stores. All right, so it's not tight, it's not putting any pressure on this at the moment. It's just there so that I can drop the alternator down and tighten everything up in a sec. But yeah, now we'll get the bonnet open and put the fan on. Now with the fan, I've actually cleaned out here with a bit of sandpaper and also sprayed some WD-40 in it just to, I guess, hopefully limit the corrosion. It probably won't be on here for long, but we'll see. And hopefully it's a little bit easier to slip over. Much easier. That's all the way down with very little pressure at all. Now we apply some leverage on the alternator, just enough to keep it tight. Feels pretty good. Put the thermostat housing in before I forget. Peeled the gasket this time, so we are good to go there. It's stuck on this side. I'm gonna put some sealant on that side because this is secondhand now. Get this sucker in place. Come in, Tokyo. All right, so I think that's got it. It is open, it doesn't look like it. It's flaring a bit there, but yeah, it feels like it's got movement. This should be easier. Basically, that pipe should be pointing more downwards by rotating this extension here. I don't want to do that because if I crack it and it leaks or anything like that, it's going to cause a problem for us. So I'd rather take it over like this and then maybe I'll try and back it off a little bit later. I might have to pull the whole thing out, reseal it, do it back in, and do it up with the hose on it properly, but for now, I think I can probably just give this a little bit more wiggling. Maybe get it a little bit deeper on, and we should be okay. That'll have to do. I also bent this in my rage fit as I was trying to get the fan off. So just try and straighten this out without breaking it. We're also going to have to put a new end on the pickup, but yeah, it'll go through there. All right, now we can put the radiator back in, and the keen observers of you will notice this is not the same radiator. So this is actually the radiator out of Violet Crumbles. When I was cleaning out the other radiator, and I did give it a really good clean out, it just kept puking big chunks of what looks to be either a stop leak or something like that. So I just wasn't confident that it was going to be clean. And this one that came out of VC was actually pretty decent when I pulled it out. I'm going to use this one, hopefully it doesn't let me down. The other one I also did have to, on the bottom plug, I actually MIG welded and tried MIG welding to bronze. MIG weld some holes up and then grind them back. And it worked up until now. That radiator hasn't leaked. But again, I just don't want to risk it. Considering I've just put all new stuff through this, why don't we just use another radiator? Violet Crumbles doesn't need this one because the bottom line is even this one was going to be rebuilt before Violet Crumbles was finished. So yeah, we'll use this one. It's the better of the two, and I'll just rebuild the other one for VC. Sweet. And then we can drop the shroud between the fan and the radiator. Boom. One. And we're clamped. Now we put on the overflow hose, but I don't think this one's going to fit because it's meant for the old radiator. So I would say that's on like that. Yeah, we're not gonna, well, look, I can do it that way for now. But I will get a longer one and I'll go around this way in future. All right, now it's time for coolant, and because I'm using coolant this time and not just water, you can guarantee there's going to be a leak somewhere, but we'll see. Keep your fingers crossed. All right, now I need to fix the temperature sender. No bueno. Now it's hard to show on camera, but if you can see on that, that is the terminal that goes through. It's got a spike on its back, which basically, as you slide it in, it's a one-way unit. So it gets pushed in this way, and then when it gets to about here, there's a relief in the plastic, and this will pop back up, and then you won't be able to pull it out. So what you've got to do is you get a small flathead screwdriver or a depinning tool if you've got a good one. Mine are garbage. And you just jam it down there to push that down, and then you can pull it out. And once it's out, then we can undo these crimps here, put the new wire in and crimp it back up, and we should be good to go. Just like that. Ta-da! Remember to put the heat shield back on. All right, so it's all looking pretty good. I'm gonna fire it up now. We're gonna leave it run for a while to see if we can get the system to bleed. We're in a pretty good spot at the moment because the back of the car is slightly lower, so we've got a good high point. I don't think we'll need the bleeding unit. So let's fire it up. Fire in the hole. Worst pause ever. All right, I'm just gonna let this run and watch for air bubbles, squeeze all the hoses to get the air out, and watch the temperature gauge and make sure the engine's not overheating. We'll see if there's any leaks and I will come back to you guys in a minute. All right, so lesson learned. You can see on the floor and everywhere, there's obviously a big airlock in the system, and that is not surprising considering we've had the water pump off and replaced. So without the little helper there, this thing burped coolant everywhere, and it comes out and it falls straight into the fan and gets flicked all over the engine bay. So there's glycol everywhere. But once I'd put the bleeding system or the burping system, whatever you want to call it, onto the radiator, and filled it back up with fluid, because it spat out probably a good couple of litres, maybe a litre and a half, 2 litres. It took a bunch more water, settled out, and the temperature gauge in the car basically sat on the first line, which I believe that first line is supposed to indicate where the thermostat is opening. We have a lot of temperature in the radiator, so the hot water is obviously circulating well. We've got steam coming off it. So it looks pretty good. But for now, I'm gonna have to let this thing cool down so that I can then go through and clean all of the engine bay again to get rid of the glycol, because that stuff just goes sticky and gross over time and discolors everything. So yeah, it's gotta go. Which unfortunately means this is where I'm gonna leave it for today. We've got a heap of work done, and really quite productive work. I don't want to call it too early, but basically I think we've replaced enough on this car that hopefully it'll be quite reliable. I've got to drive it down to Kwinana, which is quite a way away from where I am now, for the Christmas custom cars and coffee. We're going to have it down there, so that's probably the longest drive it's going to have to do, and I really want it to hold up. It will be hot and a long drive, so I'm really glad we've done this to the cooling system. So yeah, we have got through a bunch of stuff. There is still a lot to do here, but yeah, hopefully not big stuff. You know, I need to throw a spare tire and the jack and everything in the back. We need to sort out the demister button, pedal rubbers, the steering free play. I'm not going to do it in this episode, I'll do it in the next one. We're going to put some wiper blades on, replace the steering wheel, and then do some rust repairs. And basically, depending on how much time I have to do that, will depend on how much time I spend doing this. You know, this may just be a bog and paint over, just so that that rear quarter stuff doesn't raise any eyebrows at the pits. So yeah, that is basically gonna do us for today. So yeah, that just leaves us with the standard stuff. I'm gonna link to the full Violet Crumble series here, and if you haven't watched the rest of the Doofer series, I'll link to it down there. Other than that, I just want to say thanks for watching. I'll see you next time on The Build Room. Bye for now.